happen, right, Gabe? It's that colder water is going to slow the metabolism of the roots down, meaning they don't need to uptake, or even really they can't uptake it as fast, right? So that one-way river of transpiration through the plant is slowed down. And as you and I both know, if that's slowed down, that means less juice.
Yep. And in practicality, we're aiming for cool, but not cold.
Not cold
delivery, not icy, not warm, but stable. And that's really the thing.
I love that.
But
we're Jug Dealers, we're the podcast you need in your feed, teaching the game like you never seen. Jerin, Gabe, GRAMBO, true OGs, masters of the globe, set your mind free. From Denver, Colorado, where the data's green, we set the data points for the SOPs. Jug Dealers Podcast, yes indeed.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Jug Dealers Podcast, where we discuss all things cannabis and lifestyle related. Brought to you by the good people at 5A, and as always available at jugdealers.net and jugdealers.shop.
Absolutely. And today we're going to talk about what might seem like a very simple concept, but in reality, it's much more complex than you would think. And that is water temperature, specifically your irrigation water temperature.
And not just water temperature, but where the water temperature at the plants.
At the plant when it actually gets to the roots.
Because when we're running big irrigations, things change.
Things change a lot. But before that,
we got announcements.
Yes. Before that, obviously, we do have the Jug Club is back open. We're on Patreon. Things are rolling. Thank you, Josh, for all your hard work on this.
Yes. Some of you guys know we were flagged for certain things. We're flagged as cannabis. We're flagged as
I don't know if
women.
We've for some, there's never been any nudity on the show, but anyhow, we did somehow get flagged for that. Thank God. I don't think you guys really are here for that. But the Jug Club is back open. Thank you guys for sticking with us. You will have to sign back up. It's nothing automatic, but now it's on Patreon, and we do have a bunch more content on there as well. Josh has been putting together some good stuff. I've been out on the road more. So as we're out on the road, it's a lot easier to get cool content to put up there. We've been getting great road scores. We've been doing all kinds of
speaking of on the road, you guys are going to be in Germany.
Yes.
We are going to be in Germany.
We're going to be in Germany together. So all of our European listeners, in fact, all of our listeners in general, we will be doing a very exclusive drop there. It'll be some stuff that has not been seen on that continent before. We're very excited. We'll have an exclusive swag pack with that as well. We'll be dropping little tidbits as we get more of it, but we've got the whole concept up here. But again, it is a small number. It's very exclusive. So you will have to sign up beforehand. Yeah. We've got a tab that will be on the website, correct?
Jugdealers.net. You'll see MJ Berlin. Go F around and find out.
And of course, anything time you can go to the bookings page, you'll see Josh has got those all up too. Everywhere I'm going to be until the summertime is up there. If you click on that, it will actually take you right to sending me an email. So I'm going to be in any of those areas. In fact, right now I'm in Tampa currently as the show is airing. So if any of these things, you see, you can always click on there. You can contact me directly and we can connect. Gabe and I always love freestyling on the road. So, and again, just ask Dread, man. You never know. We might pull up. And then I wanted to give one quick shout out to our good friend Josh D, the OG man, the real OG Kush Story on Instagram. We got to hang out with him last week in Las Vegas. Josh, thanks for coming through, and thanks for dropping those samples. He gave me a legit, beautiful, amazing, incredibly tasty OG sample that really did bring me back. It had that nose with like a little bit of pine, a little bit of lime, a little bit of earth.
He's a real one, bro.
So Josh, thank you very much. I smoked it all. Unfortunately, I didn't get any back to Gabe, and I feel bad about it. But yes, next time. So thank you. Big shout out to Josh D. Thanks for preserving those genetics. And man, I'm telling you, it was a blast from the past. I haven't had that.
Yeah, he's the man. I always love his flower. I love Ghost flower too, man.
There you go. The OG
Ghost
man.
Last year at the Billies, Ghost pulled up with the Ghost OG live resin like sauce. And I mean, it had like a little one of those silver seal tops on it. And it was for real.
And I know you got one last shout out, right?
Yeah, I got a couple shout outs to the guys at the building, James and Ethan and E Squared, Eric and those boys, Sebastian, all you guys, man. Those guys, Big Jeff, those guys have been holding the building down. And I'll be honest with you, those guys, a lot of those guys, they helped actually be the impetus to this episode.
Love it.
Because we've been tracking down some things, and this is a big thing that I think people tend to overlook?
I think it tends to be very overlooked, and we're going to bring it back, right? And Josh, can you actually just keep that up for a little bit? Yeah. So the long and the short of it, this does sound simple, and it doesn't sound like that big a deal until you do nuke a crop. And there's a lot of people, and this is even poignant. It's funny because, and you can talk a little bit about your particular situation, maybe if you want to at a point, but even in a cold climate, you could be dealing with hot water temperatures, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't want to get too much in that.
And it's just something that I think people see their input water.
Right.
Like most people, you go most places in the middle of winter, your water coming out of the tap is like 55, 60 degrees.
Right.
And you're actually tempering it a little bit warmer to get it to a place where, you're not giving the plant super cold water because, again, super cold water is, it's got high DO, high dissolved oxygen, but it's not necessarily like I tell people, do you want to put your feet in cold water?
Well, right.
Not really.
And
so there's a perfect zone.
Yeah.
We had that one episode where you called me on it, and I remember saying something about it, and then, we addressed it later.
Sure.
But the sweet spot's really 72,
right?
For many, many reasons that we're going to go over in this episode,
right?
But it's amazing how your water quality degrades above 72 degrees quite quickly.
Well, and we're really talking about specifically and why this really matters. And again, just to really get down to why it matters, because it affects dissolved oxygen, as you just mentioned, and it affects nutrient behavior and availability. So that's why it matters. And again, it's not necessarily the source water. It's not even really what it is in the lines. It's at delivery point, right? And I think that's the main point. So how it gets from point A to point B, which is one of the things that people see and problems in their facility, right? Is how far is it going to deliver? Is it batch tanked? Is it direct injected?
Yeah, you got a big building and it's a couple 100-foot run to get there, and then
hey, bud, that makes a difference.
And then a run that's in the top of the room that's maybe where all the heat gathers.
Well, and I will say, we're going to be going deep today, so we're going to try and stay on topic because really there's a lot to this, and we're going to talk about the dissolved oxygen physics, nutrient availability, microbial dynamics, why and how lines are, going to be warming up, different things are going to happen during a cold snap, winterizing, and all these different real world fixes.
And some real world fixes.
Right, which I think really matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
So without further ado, Gabe, why don't you move us in and really start talking about, set the stakes, set the mood for everybody.
Well, most people, they think that water temperature at the res, or maybe if they're doing direct injection or something like that, they think that is the temperature. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of us don't measure the temperature at the end, but what it is at the dripper, and depending on the route that it takes through the building, can make a big difference. And the other thing is too, with those line runs, you can sometimes have 20, 30 gallons worth of water sitting in a line in which, depending on the size of the emitters, it might be 7, 8, 10, 12 minutes of running water before you actually get down to the right temperature that you're looking for. Right. And I know with a lot of these cleaner systems, people have spec'd out smaller emitters, but consequently, go ahead.
And just thinking about it too, and I'm thinking in my mind, okay, you're going to have a little bit different ambient temperature in each room. My closest room is going to to have the shortest run of water. My second room is going to, so it's like literally every one of these, you're going to get these little variables, right?
Well, and it's funny because you've always talked of hypochlorous as a crutch.
Right.
And if you don't have as much oxygen in there to kind of kill pathogens, the hypochlorous kind of masks some of these things where
these issues,
if you start, let's say you dumb down your hypochlorous or you drop it, all of a sudden more problems start popping up because water temperature.
Well, and a lot of people, again, you mentioned that 72 zone, right? And a lot of people think 68 to 72 right in there. And even these, just a few degrees can actually shift. Even when
it's crazy. It's crazy what a couple degrees can do. It is wild.
We're talking differences in dissolved oxygen capacity, which is a huge one. How much oxygen can actually hold. Root respiration efficiency. Well, geez, that's really important. Salt behavior and precipitation risk, right? So when we talk precipitation, we're not talking about it raining. We're talking about nutrients precipitating out and falling out of suspension, right? Microbial growth rates, which you just mentioned.
Yeah, which the hypochlorous can kind of mask sometimes, which people don't really think about.
And I love how you actually mentioned this too, the viscosity and flow rate when you're injecting too, right? So different things that have, more dissolved salts in there, which means they have a higher viscosity, they're going to be a heavier weight. That's going to matter if it's warmer or cooler, and what temperature it's hitting the water at, right? Or what water temperature the water's at when it's hitting and being injected in there.
When you're moving hundreds of gallons, possibly even thousands of gallons, again, we've discussed it before, but a cold gallon of water is 8.29 pounds. A warm gallon of water is 8.33 pounds. So it doesn't seem like much. It doesn't seem like much in a gallon, but when you have 500 gallons or 1,000 gallons, then all of a sudden it makes a difference.
Hey, can I ask too? You guys often talk about hypochlorous. I've been noticed a few comments for the home growers. Is there ever a situation, like, can you explain what it is? And is there ever a situation a home grower would ever need hypochlorous acid? I mean,
great question. And I would say number one, the cleaning between runs, it's absolutely fantastic. Yeah. Just as a descaler between runs, things like that. We also have friends that do run it at very low amounts for actually oxygenation in the water. So, I would say that it's definitely applicable, but in most situations, it's a crutch.
And with our buddy, Ryan, and with a couple other people,
right?
They've definitely knocked it back.
They're running at a very low.
Yeah, so running it at a very, very low rate, it works a bit different. It's
so like I used a sump pump for my grow as like my wand thing, like running a little bit through the lines and the hose and everything. All right.
Yeah, and I prefer using like Sanidate or something like that.
There are definitely other products. That's the thing. There are other things that are more microbially safe, and I think that's the biggest thing. Now, if you want to run it at very low concentrations, specifically like we said for the way our buddy does, I definitely am not anti-advocate of that. But one of the things I want to say about water temperature before we move on is, we talk a lot about consistency, and I know that even in my personal growing journey, when I was able to make things more consistent, all of a sudden all your levels
plants
just came up.
They
like consistency, whether it was controlling pH and having a pH doser and things like that, which is one of the best moves I've ever made. But I think that water temperature as one of those consistency factors and consistency variables is really, really often overlooked and could, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this episode, we venture to say that, dare I say, is one of the most important variables there, yet it's often overlooked. And not necessarily, again, what's in the reservoir. Everybody's got a temperature reading in the reservoir. It's what's it at the dripper. And you're dealing with this, specifically, which again,
it's actually, pretty simple fix. But it's just a question of really understanding how long it takes your lines to kind of purge and get to a point, and where those lines are placed in your rooms, stuff like that.
But before that, let's talk about this, the temperature aspect, and really, and again, this, to let everybody sink this in again, colder water can hold more dissolved oxygen, which to me seems completely counterintuitive, right? But why don't you tell us a little bit about the physics of that?
Gas dissolving into water follows something called Henry's law of behavior. And so solubility decreases as temperatures increase. It's actually pretty simple. So the practical takeaway is warm solution has a lower maximum dissolved oxygen. And colder solution has a higher maximum dissolved oxygen. We actually do a whole episode on this, but it's actually quite amazing to me. And some of the numbers that I downloaded were actually a little different than some of the numbers I've seen in the field. And I started digging into that. And that's because the numbers that you see provided are generally a freshwater. And we're looking at a water with nutrient that has salts in it, which are disassociating things. So automatically, but we've seen as low as like four parts per million, which is like, that'll kill plants at like 80 degrees, in which you wouldn't think 72 to 80 degrees could do that. But it's pretty wild.
Here's the weird twist though, right? And here's the real nuance. And if everybody's wondering why we're all coughing so much, we hit that strawberry adhesive.
Jug Club members, go check the behind the scenes. We did a behind the scenes documentary for Jugs Club, so you can see exactly why the guys are coughing.
I had to address that because everybody's like, anyway, it was delicious. All right, so unfortunately, or not necessarily unfortunately, but again, somewhat counterintuitively to me, higher dissolved oxygen doesn't automatically mean healthier roots, because root metabolism is temperature dependent as well.
And there's
so it can't be too cold. So there's got to be just like pH, where we know in the middle, 5.8, ha ha ha. If we know, you know what I mean? That's the softball down the middle. So there's got to be a down the middle, which you kind of got the cat right out of the bag right off the beginning, 72 degrees, right?
Hey guys, today's show is brought to you by jugdealers.shop. You want to grow the best cannabis possible? Head over to jugdealers.shop and get something like our Ruby Fulvic. It's going to give you more efficient uptake on your NPK. You could also try our Winter Frost to increase secondary metabolite uptake and improve your cultivar's flavor and phenotypic expression. Or finally, grab some Cocoa Blocks to save time and money. This is how you can support the show, and it keeps us going. We're never sponsored. We're 100% funded by you taking your garden to the next level. Head over to jugdealers.shop and get something to help your cultivation thrive. Now, back to the show.
Right out of the bag, right off the beginning, 72 degrees, right? And we'll talk a bit about why that actually is. But that to me is very, very interesting. And so that means that we have two competing curves, right?
Very much so.
So dissolved oxygen capacity improves as water get colder. We just said that, right? However, root respiration and enzymatic activity generally slows as the root zone gets cooler, which that makes sense to all of us, right? Metabolism slowing as it gets colder. I mean, that's, cold-blooded. I mean, that doesn't make, that's a concept that's easy to get. So in other words, you can have high dissolved oxygen water that's still a problem if you're chilling the root zone and slowing that nutrient uptake, because that's what's really going to ultimately happen, right, Gabe? It's that colder water is going to slow the metabolism of the roots down, meaning they don't need to uptake, or even really they can't uptake it as fast, right? So that one-way river of transpiration through the plant is slowed down. And as you and I both know, if that's slowed down, that means less juice.
Yep. And in practicality, most facilities we're aiming for cool, but not cold.
Not
solution delivery, not icy, not warm, but stable. And that's really the thing.
I love that.
But the biggest thing is you got to measure it.
Well, and what does stable really mean? Like if you define stable, is that?
Well, like morning versus afternoon. Let's say, like if it's a morning feed, it's been sitting in the lines all evening, or let's say morning, and the water's been sitting in the lines through the night, and it got warmer, or the lights were off and it was cool, and it got cool through the night. But having differentiation in temperatures between those morning and afternoon feeds, the big one is end the line feeds versus the first zone.
Yeah, like I was talking about.
And in some of these buildings, you might need to do a purge on your lines, in order to get some of that warmer water out of the line. The other thing is too, if you're in a place where you're doing direct injection or something like that, you could be getting the tail end of a feed from another room.
Well, and here's one, and this is the thing, and just to back up slightly, but that stability really does refer to trying to, whether it's a morning or afternoon feed, you want it the same temperature.
Consistency.
That consistency, stability.
You don't want to shock.
Shouldn't be majorly different.
Well, it's the same thing. Like, as much as I tell people you don't want to shock the plants with cold water, you don't want to shock the plants with warm water too. And they're way more sensitive than we are. Like, that temperature range is really 65 to 75. It's 10 degrees.
And here's the thing, if you think about it too, they live their life in terra firma, in the earth, right? In this big, heat sink that's so stable that's why they're not able to take these massive.
By the way, that 10 degrees is generous. It really is 4. It's 68 to 72. Just so we're square. I know people are going to, it's 68 to 72.
It reminds me of what you guys talk about with pH, that a bad pH at a regular interval is better than random pH, in a more calm zone.
Yes, exactly. Again, stability, consistency, especially, again, we're doing horticulture, right? These aren't necessarily just out there living on their own. We've kind of coddled these things and selected them and put them in this situation that this is now how we have to do it. Yep. So, but one thing I do want to mention about dissolved oxygen measuring, and this is always so great, right? And it's like, as soon as you think you got got it. Now you get this. So unfortunately, dissolved oxygen meters read differently with temperature compensation. So it's like, okay.
Yeah, it's going to be different. It's going to be influenced by temperature. It's going to be influenced by salinity. It's going to be influenced by agitation and aeration methods because, again, do you have a mixed pump? Do you have an air stone?
Right,
do you have do you have a vortex? What do you have? And then, residence time in the pipes. That's another big one that, again, people don't think of. But if you're in a giant facility where you have super long runs,
right,
you have to do the math. And you'd be surprised sometimes in these runs that are a couple 100 feet long, you might have 20, 30, 40 gallons of water sitting in the lines. Whereas, again, depending on the size of those emitters, if you are not running a purge at the end of those lines, the emitters dictate how much water is going to be coming out of that line.
I mean, that's why it's in fact, that's how they're delineated.
Here's
1 gallon per hour, half a gallon per hour, 5 gallons per hour.
Here's a good pro tip for you. Shout out to James and Ethan again on this one.
Nice.
If you see condensate on your irrigation lines in your room, that's a good thing.
That's a good thing.
That means that water in the line is cold.
That's a good thing.
That's a great observation if you're looking.
Okay. Hey, that is a great pro tip. Well, let's move this on a little bit and talk specifically about nutrients and really how temperature is affected. And obviously we talked a little bit about, they could possibly precipitate out, things like that. But I think a lot of people think once everything's
dissolved, we're in good shape.
Not true, right? Not true. pH can obviously affect this as well, but in reality, that crossover, again, we have these dueling, if not even trueling curves that are always happening within the plant world and ratios and everything else, right? But people hear that, they think, oh, it's all good to go. However, that's wrong. And this is for the people that are even running liquid.
Dude, why don't you tell people the 4 main ways that temperature really affects nutrient solubility?
Let's do that. All right. So let's first talk about solubility and precipitation risk, which we put at number 1 because I feel like it is one of the biggest issues, right? So some salts become more likely to precipitate, which is fall out of solution at certain temperatures, especially when combined with, you got it, pH drift. I was alluding to that, right? That was pretty good. Alkalinity and concentrates mixing. So again, that's why we always say don't mix concentrate with concentrate. Have a little bit of time between it. Let all that actually dissipate into the mixture. So hey, go figure. Number 2, viscosity. So colder water temperature is slightly more viscous. So it's going to change the flow characteristics. It can alter the pressure behavior in marginal systems as well, and can change mixing dynamics. So as that temperature, whatever it is, it's a little bit slower. It's a little bit more molasses is hitting a cold water. It's not going to be able to mix through the water and actually dissipate properly through that. And a lot of times people don't necessarily have a lot of times between injection and actually getting dumped to the drippers, right?
Great. Yes.
You know what I mean? Point. So if you had some more room, maybe that, again, lots of variables, people, lots of variables here. Reaction rates being number 3.
Big one.
Warmer solution speeds chemical reactions. We know this from enzymes too, right? Enzymes are definitely, they're starting to crank up with those, as it goes up in temperature, they're able to actually crank out and do more of what they're supposed to do. And unfortunately,
this is a big one.
Well, and let's keep this in mind too. It also speeds up the reactions of unwanted things as well.
Yeah.
Right. So that can be good and bad. So we're obviously keeping with the root zone temperature, we're keeping all that metabolism up and high, but we're also possibly keeping microbes in a zone where they really like. And that's why, like you said, 4 degrees, not 10, And
then finally biology,
the microbial growth.
A big one.
Yes. Microbial growth rates generally increase, which we've seen anecdotally.
Think about the jungle.
Anecdata, shout out to my buddy behind the glass there, up to a point, which matters if you have organics, biofilm risk, or any microbial inoculants, which I'll be honest. And shout out to even, some of the guys out in LA, shout out to Russian Assassin Boys, probably the best commercial cannabis I've ever seen. Anybody that says you can't put biology in rock, well, I beg to differ.
So basically what you're saying is temperature doesn't just impact plant physiology. It impacts system chemistry as well.
Yeah, the whole ecosystem, the full system chemistry. And like we said, even as we're talking, it's like we're finding additional little variables that
this was a fun one to write because as you're putting it together, there's so many bells that go off. And I'm sure for a lot of people listening, there's going to be people running to their irrigation rooms
going, shit, I wonder what
I wonder what I wonder what I'm feeding my plants
and so like that's also one of the reasons why people also have that extra dripper that they'll just put a graduated cylinder in, so they see they're matching. Okay, hey, at this point it's coming out. Well, you could do the same thing having just a little thermometer in there as well, right? And that's right at point. So little pro tip: get a little thermometer to throw in that graduated beaker. That everybody should have at least one extra dripper sitting there per row, right? I'm sure maybe you even have a couple out there along the row. I don't know how you guys have it set up, right?
You mind running that up, GRAMBO?
Here's one thing I find very interesting too, right? Is the fact that, and I don't think people would consider this, right? So I'm testing pH at the beginning. What happens about that 20 or 30 gallons? It sits in there overnight in the pipes, right? That has nutrient in it. So it's not completely stable, warms up. pH is going to change too. So now the pH that I've set at the res and temperature for that matter has completely changed by the time it's set in those lines.
And a lot of times you're going to, if you're walking into your rooms and you're seeing plants at the end of the line doing something different than the plants in the middle of the table.
Wow.
That's a telltale.
Wow.
That's a telltale sign right there.
Something's different. Something's less and more available.
Something is amiss.
Well, okay. So in some of these are going to be pretty obvious, but Gabe, why don't you run us through why line temperatures change? What's out there? What's happening?
So like ambient room temps is a big one. Obviously, if you have a line sitting in there, it's gonna heat up over time.
Yep.
I always tell people water is room temperature. Right. So if it sits in a room, it will be room temperature. Some of the
room.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of the radiant load lines near lights, ceilings, mechanical chases, anything like that.
Yeah.
So if you have irrigation lines that are sitting up at the top of the room, that's pretty much a heat sink right there, in which that's where all the heat goes. Time sitting in the line.
Which we've been talking a lot about.
Yeah. That's a big one. Stagnant water becomes, like I just said, room temperature. It's pretty, it's just science,
Science,
the longer,
bro.
some of the distance in some of these runs, and some of these big buildings, they promoted direct injection and stuff like that. Or you just have, when I try to design a building, I was always taught to make your irrigation room like a spider. So or like an octopus. So all the runs go out even distances.
And now it makes sense, though.
And unfortunately, you just don't always have that possibility. Yep. So sometimes you have an irrigation room here, and you have rooms that are close, and then you have rooms that are really far away. And so you just really need to do the math and figure out a way to evacuate those lines quickly, so that way you're not having these issues. Sometimes the material you use,
that was the other thing.
PVC versus poly versus insulated trunk lines. Like sometimes, I've been in buildings where they have full insulation on the lines, and now it makes intermittent irrigations. When you're doing a bunch of line shots, and I'm not anti-line shots,
no,
because it's definitely a good way to do things, but you just want to make sure that you're getting that back down to the right temperature. And again, if the plants at the end of the line are telling you something different than the plants in the middle of the room, pay attention.
So that gets me thinking too in the shots too, right? Because I'm going, okay, if it's more full saturation, I go, whatever, bro. I have in the SOPs, I do a flush pop right before it goes through. I get it to line temp. You waste a little bit of water or newts, but whatever, right? But if you're doing 21 shots in a day, you can't do that. It would just be too much.
And the thing
purging.
Is, I've said this for years. It's one of the reasons I am not a fan of Rockwell. Shout out to Dread. Shout out.
We always shout out Dread with the Rockwell.
Shout out to Shane Hudo. Shout out to the homies who can do it.
The guys that can do it.
It truly is an art form, but it is a Ferrari.
Right.
And the minute things get out of range, the Ferrari.
Well, and here's the real world example, and this could put you in the wall, right? You go in, your res temp 66. You go in, and you're not paying attention to what's actually the dripper. And this is a very realistic temperature swing. Start at 66, and by the time it sits in sits in the lines, whatever, for not even that long, you could very easily be up to 74 degrees.
Yeah,
and let's be honest, room temperature. What rooms run at 74 degrees, Gabe? They're not. So they're going to be running more like 78, 80, 82, 85. Are they right? But depending whether you're doing LED, HPS, I'm just saying on the better side of things, or you're on 78. So if it's actually sitting there and getting to room temperature, think what room temperature is. It's much, much higher than we want. So even going 66 to 74, that 8-degree swing doesn't even seem as major as all of a sudden it's going 66 or 68 to 82.
Yeah.
And that could be real, right?
Yep.
So what what actually happens when that kind of temperature change happens? Well, dissolved oxygen delivered is lower, because we already talked about that.
And inconsistent. It's back and it's waving. You know?
And that shows that you have root zone C's temperature pulses, which you never want to see. That's the stability. That's a lack of stability that
plants want consistency.
Again, think about them being in the ground. Think about them being in there and that consistency, that level, historically speaking, evolutionarily speaking, being in the ground and that kind of consistency, right? Also, the nutrient behavior changes like we were talking about at the dripper and at the media surface itself, right? So that's the other thing. You've got a gradient of temperature through the substrate as well. Another variable to be considered, right?
And then biofilm risks increase in warm, stagnant section.
Absolutely.
That's pretty obvious.
That one's obvious, right?
You know.
So where do you want? Okay, let's now we're to the practicality of things.
So now how
where do we put stuff, Gabe? What do we do?
How do we find a measure of truth is the question. And so first, you want to take an independent probe. You know,
Hey everybody, I did not want to interrupt the show. However, we need you to help us by taking your grow to the next level. Go right on over to jugdealers.shop and pick up some Slicium. Don't let bugs or a failed AC or a broken pump take your grow down. Get Slicium at jugdealers.shop. It is readily water soluble and uptaken immediately to thicken cell walls and reduce any and all abiotic and biotic stresses. Keep in mind, this is how we support the show. We are never sponsored. We are funded by you taking your grow to the next level. So to support us and your grow, head on over to jugdealers.shop and get yourself something real nice. Now back to the show.
Independent probe. You know, I know in my building, I've got Roya, I've got other sensors that are tied to other things.
I got sensors to check sensors. You know what I mean?
But there you go. You need sensors. Not only do you need sensors to check sensors and have redundancy, but then you need independent sensors that are independent of all those things.
All those other
the
sensors.
minute you see this issue, you take your independent sensor, which generally is a little bit higher dollar, and it's a better piece of equipment, and it's something that really is going to get you the numbers you need to see. You're going to put the temperature res at the probe. You're going to put it at the main header. You're going to put it at the end of the longest run, and you're going to get it at least representative of one dripper point. Now I know, look, we have Arroyo. We have drip stations that tell me all these things. Take it to where that drip station is and take a reading independent of the drip station. So now you're checking the equipment against a different equipment. You know, anytime I have anything, regardless of whether it's pH or whatever, you always have another probe. You always have other pieces of equipment. And if there's something that you know to be a certain way, and you take a piece of equipment and it doesn't look right, automatically check the piece of equipment first. Because you're like, hey, I check this all the time, and it's always this, and then this. So sometimes the equipment is off. You know,
that's why the first thing you do if you're in a lab, first thing you always do is what? Calibrate. You calibrate. And then what do you do between things? You calibrate. Without that calibration, then you don't even have a set point. So then it becomes, there isn't even data at that point, right? But I think a big point of this is to realize you don't need 50 sensors, right?
You just need to locate the delta of the pattern.
At a certain point, I think
the delta of the pattern.
The delta of the pattern.
I like that one.
So, and obviously, well, and said a different way, you want it at the beginning and you want something at the end, right? And what happens in between it, maybe you need to address that, but you need to know the beginning and then you need to know the end, right? And obviously, like you said, especially when you have these room differences, you can't just do it in one room. And that's kind of the pattern because you're going to want to see the pattern on my closest room versus my farthest room. I mean, you see the same thing, even like, this is going to sound kind of funny, but like even in a row of peppers, right? All the peppers in a row of peppers, all those Anaheim peppers, they're the same pepper, right? It's not the hot or versus the mild. No, it's all the same pepper. What it is it's flood irrigated. So the front peppers get the most water and they're the mildest ones. And the ones on the back end are the hottest ones because the most got the least amount of water and the most pissed off, right? So that's in a weird way, just a little bit, kind of the same, but different. Hope you guys are following me on that. Anyhow, let's
dive into some solutions.
How do we get to the solutions?
How do we get to actually fixing some of these problems? Well, first thing, you can insulate the trunk lines. That's a pretty low hanging fruit.
It is, but I think it's probably an area that a lot of people don't want to put the money. But again, do I think it's low hanging fruit? And
you're losing yields. It's a good place to put money.
Great place to start. What else?
Move the lines away from the radiant heat sources. Shorten the dead legs. So just make it so they're pretty short runs.
Right.
You know, I've had it in buildings where you had, where you actually had an IBC tote outside the room, and then it was just plumbed right into the room.
Hey, simple and effective. That's just fine.
Use recirculating main rings. So, you know, if your design supports it, have some recirculation in there. That's
to avoid the stagnation, right?
Yep. Avoid the stagnation. Make sure you're not, and by the way, make sure you're not running these pumps too long, because the pumps can actually.
That's another variable that we have in there. Another variable.
You know, and if you can, do a pre-line flush.
I like this purge strategy, if you will.
And a lot of people, I mean, here's the thing. A lot of people do a post line flush, in which
I'm thinking now it's more important to do a pre-line
in
flush.
which they'll evacuate the line. And I'm not saying it's not doing anything, but either way, if it sits in the line, it's still going to warm up. It's gonna come up to temperature. So, you know, ultimately, I think a pre-run, a pre-room flush is definitely something to look into.
And here's the deal too. If you really think about it, right, the pre-flush is literally for water temperature, and the post-flush is going to be to move the nutrient solution out of there to avoid scaling.
So it's not.
So I mean, there's same but different, right? You're doing it at the beginning and the end, but they are for different reasons.
Yeah, I've seen some systems where people have talked into chillers and stuff like that. I've seen one where there was I looked into one where there was like jacketed pipes. You know, where they actually had jacketed pipes for cooling. And again, maintaining that consistent mixing can help with with keeping things cool. And then, like I said again, sometimes if you have a Mondi pump, if you have some type of pump in there, that actually heats up the water as well. So you just want to be cognizant of these things,
because all of these are little sources, and it's the buildup, right? So it's a little bit of heat from here, it's a little bit of heat from there, and then it becomes actually something, right? So now. Here's one way, and this is again one of the practice. How do you increase that
strategy here?
Here's the strategy. How do you increase that dissolved oxygen in a way that matches your temp reality, right? Because that's the thing. We talk about this a lot, right, Gabe? There's ideal and then there's real. So this is understanding what ideal is, but living in a real world, and how do we actually make that happen? Well, you talked about a little bit too, aeration, agitation. It helps, but if your water is warm, you're already fighting at the ceiling. So how do you keep mixing it and adding that water temperature? That's not going to be a good thing. And if using an oxygen injection, ensure the contact time, right? And so that's like, when you're putting a Venturi valve, or you're putting, air stones in it, obviously you want to have it travel through the water as long as it can, right? So you wouldn't want to just bubble it on the top. That's not going to do much for you, is it?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Make sure it's the bottom.
And then avoid blasting micro bubbles that don't dissolve before the plant, right? So that's, again, these are a lot of these little variances, a lot of these little, variabilities, even something as simple as the size of the bubble can actually affect surface area, uptakeability, all that kind of stuff.
Hey, look, we've all had the air stone hanging in like the middle of the tank.
Well, that's kind of what I was talking about.
And then you're watering your plants.
Okay, see,
and then all of a sudden that air stone's like right at the top of, and not to mention, you have less water in the barrel at that point, but you have that stone, or maybe you have two stones going in there sometimes.
So here's another way to attack it. Why don't you talk a little bit about irrigation scheduling tactics to attack water temperature, or let's say regulate in water temperature.
So first off, if you have a long idle time and warm rooms, you want to schedule short purge pulses before the first real feed.
Right.
If there's a way to kind of evacuate the line, we've actually, in certain buildings I've talked about having it where there's like a dump line.
Right.
And you just have it, on a solenoid where it dumps the first 2 minutes, down the.
Think about it like this, Gabe. It's like even on our trees, right? If it's in the middle of the summer, I turn that thing on, and it's so hot coming out of those. We don't just dump it on our.
That's a great point.
Trees, man.
Yeah, that's a great point.
It just came
if you have that hose sitting out in the summer, you let it drain for a couple. It's the same exact thing. It really is. That's a great.
Places.
You want to avoid the plant really getting that first hot slug first thing, like So
and again, consistency is key. And that's what we talk, and we talk about that a lot. And consistency is, over all these variables, but this happens to be one that we really see because most stress is from these swings. It's not from a single number. And it's kind of like what GRAMBO was mentioning in the pH, studies that we've talked about. If it's at a consistent pH that seems to be extreme, the plant can actually adjust and handle it. It's when it gets these variabilities, it's these ups, these downs, that's what the plant really has difficulty dealing with.
Well, and the thing, I think one of these things that people don't realize is that, it can be very media specific. Rock wool, cocoa, soil, they all respond differently to these temperature impulses, temperature pulses. And a cocoa, because it's inert, because there's so little buffers in there, it can, those temperatures, it can handle it. It is so much harder on a cocoa media or on a rock wool media than it is on a cocoa media, because like I say to folks, cocoa is an insurance policy. And in that respect, it's an insurance policy, because even if you're keeping that root zone
that's one of the things. And then also, why do you think you always see so much of that little bit of microbial growth and algae growth on top of rock wool slabs too, right? Temperature. Now, I mean, I'm pretty convinced at this point.
As soon as it gets north of 76 on the top of those cubes, those blocks.
But again, that cold solution can also shock the roots. And so all of a sudden, right at the beginning of the day, and you'll even see it in the leaves where they go, oh no, kind of almost just claw down. I've definitely seen that before when I've hit it with, again, middle of the winter, right? Forgot to really, mess with it and get the water. Because I've always just been again, not icy, not too warm. Whatever. Okay. Now, as far as let's really move into winterizing and cold weather, and this really hits home for you right now, Gabe, because you are in if anybody thinks that Colorado's cold, go to Michigan. I guess I get that according to my good friend Gabe here.
Brutal. It's more like Canada.
So it is. So obviously with winter, this is where they lose pumps. The lines get split. There's hidden contamination issues that you wouldn't even think, and you would think that the summer is when you have all these contamination issues with things that are growing out and around the facility. But in reality, winter is pretty brutal on this stuff, no?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, you see people, they run their lines, and, a lot of these buildings, you have it where they have them outside the rooms.
Right.
And it gets into the room and they're creating issues. But if you're running your lines along walls and stuff,
or an exterior wall specifically,
an exterior wall. And that's where you've seen a lot of these problems. And a lot of times that's where you'll see some of the, hey, you've been running these things for 5, 6, 7 years. That's where you start to see things start to rear their ugly heads. And you got to remember, again, water weighing less and more in the summer and winter, or I should say in temperatures, it really, it helps speak to that contraction and expansion of water, in which all those things put pressure on the system. Well, it changes the actual water pressure on the system.
And I was going to say about that too, because for whatever reason, it just popped into my head too, right? Because you could have backflow events and stuff like that because these major pressure changes, especially in a big facility when you're pulling that much water, and especially if it's municipal water, people don't really realize that pressure changes happen even at your house through the day and into the night, right? So like, for example, if you change your faucet fittings or something like that, you better get up in the middle of the night and check it, because the water pressure is going to go up in the night. Why? Because everybody's sleeping. So they're not pulling off. That's when shit always leaks.
When they first set up the irrigation at Chris, they didn't have any backflow preventers.
Right.
How'd you find out about that? Well, the hard way. Then you end up putting in backflow preventers. So in a lot of these situations, you don't know until you know. You don't know until something bit you in the ass, and then all of a sudden you're like, "Oh, is that going to get us in trouble?"
No, we're deep in.
Okay, so let's
going to get us in trouble?
Yes.
Oh, damn it. And for the people, and thank you for you guys that have stuck with us this long. For the folks that are actually in facilities, Gabe, I want you to give people a practical winterization checklist. Something, and by the way, this could be at home too, because if you are running, on exterior walls, I mean, again, even in Colorado, we'll hit these days where we'll get rarely, but -5, -10, -15. That changes the situation.
Yeah, exterior wall runs, attic roof run spaces, dock doors, stuff like that. Any
vestibules, any
unconditioned spaces,
spaces,
stuff like that. And if anything, add in heat insulation trace where necessary. The heat tape, That's actually somewhere where people don't think about, but on their condensate lines too.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what, a little bit of heat tape will go a long way. From living in the cabin days, that heat tape saved my ass more than once.
Slide that up, GRAMBO.
But obviously also SOPs for cold snaps, down to just a little bit.
Yep.
SOPs specific for cold snaps. So keeping that minimal recirculation if possible to prevent freezing in vulnerable areas, right?
Yeah, we actually
sometimes that's not possible.
It's wild. We actually have like our RO tank is so big it's outside. And so we have to and it's got enough water in it that it doesn't freeze, but you still have to insulate the lines from the RO tank that go back into the building.
Right.
I mean, this thing's like a 10,000 gallon tank. So, and it's not the type of thing where, again, a lot of people don't think about it, but.
And that's why you got to verify your temperatures at the end of these runs always. Summer, winter. I mean, that just I'm convinced at this point that in a facility, that must be one of your SOPs that's checked absolutely regularly every single day. And of course, checking your pump rooms, checking your, it's weird because a lot of times these irrigation rooms seem to get put in these like cold spaces the forgotten corners or whatever.
And you should constantly be checking your backflow valve. You know, I mean, look, these things fail sometimes. So checking your endpoints, checking out your blowout lines, checking all these things, having a little documentation on it could save your ass one day to walking into a building that is
let me also be
compromised.
Compromised. I like how you're saying that. But winterizing is not just preventing freezing, it's preventing the spring surprise, right? So it's these biofilms, it's EC drifts, or even debris just coming through the emitters, right? By actually paying attention to this on a regular basis, you're able to prevent some of these surprises, hopefully, or at least be able to deal with them as quickly as possible if they do rear their ugly head. This has actually been a really good episode. I have thank you for putting this one together, Gabe. And also for all our listeners, if you have show ideas, we're always open ears. And I really think that helps us all get to better place
if you do have show ideas, go to jugdealers.net, scroll all the way to the bottom. There's the little questions form. Just throw it in there and be like, why don't you guys talk about this?
And again, you never know. Again, we might pull up on you never know, and we might just throw out a topic. But we're another banger, man. I've really enjoyed this one, and I definitely am excited to keep bringing you guys great content. It's always good to be in the Jug Den with my good friend Gabe here. So until next time, we'll see you guys soon. Peace. Hey, everybody. Big shout out to all of our European listeners. If you're planning at being in Berlin for Mary Jane in June, come by and see us. We're going to do a very exclusive drop on some products you guys have never seen before. It will be sign up only. You'll come and pick up your package there. The way to sign up for this is to go to our website at jugdealers.net and click on the MJ Berlin tab. You can also type it in at jugdealers.net/MJ Berlin, and that will be to sign up for a very exclusive nutrient pack that will be dropping for the very first time. This is available to anybody that's going to be attending Mary Jane Berlin. You must get it in person. Come by and see us. We'll be dropping our booth number here sometime real soon. But if you want to get signed up now, go and click the tab or type in the address and we'll get you signed up. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in Berlin.